to the web platform for the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred. I'm Angela Voss, and I'm here with my colleagues Geoffrey Cornelius, Louise Livingstone, Mary Atwood and William Rowlandson to tell you something about the work we do and why we're doing it. If it resonates with you, then please do sign up for our newsletter and become part of our community. Geoffrey and I have been running MA and research programmes in Canterbury, Kent, UK for the past 15 years now, and the MA in Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred at Canterbury Christchurch University is coming to an end next year. So we're taking the initiative forward to create an online forum with an archive of our academic past, as well as a wealth of new material, online courses and webinars, and ways of moving into the future. So what are we about? Well, I recently had a message on Academia Edu which said, "Thank you for your life's dedication to themes that lie far deeper than the stated topic suggests." And I guess that as you explore our offerings here, you'll see what that means. We offer a transformative learning experience which integrates creativity, intuition, imagination, and critical thinking about topics or areas which are often deemed taboo or unacceptable in the modern academy. We're concerned with the depths and the heights of religious and spiritual experiences, communication with nature and other realms, divinatory, magical and ritual practices, the power of the arts to move us, and perhaps most importantly, the restoration of the function of symbol and metaphor in our over-literalized world. We explore different modes of perception and promote reflexivity and self-knowledge in the Platonic sense of know thyself as part of a universal web or interplay of life and soul. My own background is in Renaissance music, magic and astrology, and I love the wisdom in the Western esoteric and cosmological traditions, which can teach us so much about participation, integration and holistic awareness in our very fragmented world. In short, I'm passionate about the restoration of the imagination as a primary way of knowing, and I've written and taught about this for the past 20 years. In the autumn, we are running a 5-part course called Opening the Magic Windows, where we will each explore a different mode of knowing and seeing into the mysterious realms of the sacred. I will be looking at Geoffrey Kripal's ideas of the Gnostic scholar and the third classroom as ways of being and teaching that liberate us from the traditional dualisms of academic objectivity and personal experience and practice. Louise, would you like to say something about your work and what you will be offering?
Of course, yes, thank you, Angela. So my background is in counselling and coaching and mediation, and my doctoral research is founded on the idea that traditional ways of knowing and being in the world are severely limited and are leading us into increasingly harmful ways of being in the world. And in this sense, my particular area of research focuses on how the heart as an organ of perception can aid us to perceive the world and engage with the world differently. And that is in ways that are more harmonious and enabling for people, planet, and more than human beings. An exploration of this idea naturally leads us towards discourses including depth psychology, Platonism, esoteric wisdom, religious mysticism, holistic science, neuroscience, cultural history, and transformational learning. These areas of research offer the possibility to seriously consider the subtler realms of human experience that are increasingly deemed taboo or unacceptable, I think, as you said earlier, in the modern academy and in the contemporary world in general. But being open to these ideas can carry the potential to move us towards an understanding of our interconnectedness with the wider world and consequently our responsibility to each other and the world in which we live. Which leads me on to my magic window, which is the magic window of the heart. And what I'll be offering is looking at my research and taking the heart seriously as a place of wisdom and knowledge that could guide us in relation to our engagement with the world in these particularly turbulent and traumatic times. And specifically making the case to bring heart wisdom and heart knowledge into the conversation at the social political level. And as probably we all know, many centuries ago, the heart connected us to the deep mystery of life. It was porous, and open to the divine, providing an invaluable link between earth and heaven. However, the heart of modern times is seen as impermeable and a self-contained organ, generally understood and engaged with through a medical science narrative. And as such, our own wise hearts that perhaps know and love and feel and think cannot really find a safe enough place in the world to speak their truth. So I look at the work of Robert Romanishin, depth psychologist, also James Hillman, responding to his lament that we are today bereft of a philosophy and psychology of the heart. And sort of looking, I suppose, in the sense that if our hearts are speaking to us in a contemporary context, reduced to the idea that the heart is simply an organic biological pump, then the heart can only be seen as trivial sentiment in terms of its characteristics and qualities of love and kindness and compassion. So trivial sentiment at best and irrationality at worst. So I explore the limitations of such a view and open up to the possibility that it is not the heart that has changed, but it is we who have forgotten how to listen to the soft whisperings of the very organ that has guided us in the world since the very beginning. So that's what I'm offering in terms of my session. And so I'm going to pass on now to Mary to talk about your background and your window.
Okay, thank you, Louise. So I'm Mary Atwood, and the magic window that I'll be offering in this 5-week course will be on Renaissance art. And I think we all discover windows throughout our lives that open our perceptions, our hearts, our minds to something that perhaps we've forgotten or never even realized was there. Reading a wonderful novel, listening to music, communing with nature, meditation, or even having a heartfelt conversation with another person can become alchemical and open windows. But one of the most powerful forms of opening these windows that I've discovered through my life in terms of my academic journey and my journey through work and writing, meditation, yoga, all the sort of fields that I've been fascinated by, is the power of great art. And I suppose you could say great art is a subjective view in some sense, but I do feel that, like beauty, there are some things which define great art and what true beauty is and can be. And I wonder today whether we are in danger of losing not only our visionary capacity, our visionary ability to be able to actually really look and see art and the multiple layers of meaning and feeling and ways in which it can open us to something that perhaps we've forgotten. But old art and traditional art in particular is not trendy at the moment. And I wonder whether in a few years, people might be going around somewhere like the National Gallery and completely miss these wonderful works of art, which are there waiting for us to see them with the right eyes. There was a brief moment in our history where works of art were not dead objects to be analysed or catalogued in a museum, but they were understood as alive, as animate, and they were windows literally to other worlds. And they were there to inform the viewer, to guide on a moral and soulful level. And this period in our history was 15th century Renaissance Florence, where the flourishing of art embodied these principles and was created to help awaken the senses, the intellect and the soul. So I'll be looking at this particular period in this course, but also looking back, further back to the late medieval awakening of the imagination, as we saw with Saint Bonaventure's Tree of Life, and then going slightly back further to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and then bringing it forwards again and asking, questioning, what does it mean for us today and now, and why would it even matter that we look at Renaissance art or know how to look and what that might mean for us?
William, would you like to say?
Okay, yes. Hello, my name is William Rowlandson. I work at the University of Kent. I'm a lecturer in modern languages, in particular in Hispanic studies. And of the many areas that I've been teaching and researching, a particular moment of magic that fascinates me is the capacity for literature, for short stories or novels or plays, or poetry, to constitute the magical window into what William Butler Yeats describes as the chains on chains of conscious beings that are behind the visible. Now, there are many techniques for altering consciousness, and there are many techniques to enter in some form of relationship and some form of communication with these chains and chains of being. But oddly enough, focus is not often placed upon literature as the mechanism for creating that space. And where I find particularly interesting the capacity for literature is where the reader is invited into the text and where the reader engages with the narrator, with the author, with the characters in a multi-log, that's to say a dialogue of many parts. Now, on the one hand, you could say there's nothing magical about that, because every time I read any text, I'm engaging with the voices within that text. There's nothing magical about that. If I'm reading a railway timetable, I'm entering in some kind of communication with the writer of that railway timetable. It's not magical, but of course, that's where the word that I pay particular attention to comes into play, and that is the imaginal. Now, the imaginal for me is that moment in the reading of a text when the reader suddenly finds themselves engaging with characters who somehow engage back with them. It's that magical turn, that funny flip, when it seems that the characters are aware of the reader. Now, this doesn't happen all the time, and perhaps that's just as well. We wouldn't want to be living in a world that's completely over-brimming with magic. But certainly what does happen with the right conditions, with the right preparation, with the right training, and obviously with the right text, a moment, a doorway, a window can suddenly be opened, and suddenly the character and the reader and the author and the narrator are all swirling together in this strange space. Now, what are the implications of that? For me, the biggest implication is not that the text constitutes itself a magical space, although I find that fascinating. It's that when you then put the book down, there's that lingering sense of living in a fiction, that lingering sense that our lives themselves have no fundamental ontological distinction from the life of a character in a fiction. And just to give that an example, one might well assume that Hamlet lives, he thinks, he acts, he reacts, and at the same time, as any detailed reading, any close reading of Shakespeare reveals, Hamlet seems to be aware of the fact that he is a character in a drama. I find that utterly beguiling, and I love to explore those magical spaces. In the session that I'll be delivering for this mini course on the magic windows, I'll be selecting a couple of tales by the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges, sometimes called Borges in English, who works constantly at that magical space and is always laying traps for us and tripping us up and opening up these strange windows, sometimes which are disguised as funny little literary tropes or even grammatical or syntactical anomalies. And I will also be exploring a couple of stories of the Argentine writer Julio Cortázar, whose name pronounced in English is Cortázar, who again has these strange mirrors taking place within the text, where the text holds up a mirror to the reader in the same way that it holds up a mirror to the characters themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, the character and the reader are engaged in a rather peculiar and magical dialogue. So there we are. Looking forward to meeting you on the course.
Thank you, William.
Thank you, William. And my name is Geoffrey Cornelius, and it's delightful to be able to talk to you about our programme. A little bit of background from me. I've worked for many years with Angela in recent times, 15 years or more, developing a type of programme that's involved with study of the matters of the sacred and our particular path into the sacred. And that really, for me, was the recent work I've done on these lines has been a culmination or high watermark of many years for me of teaching and practicing. My background actually is I'm an astrologer, diviner, and I've studied the philosophy of divination. These things interest me greatly. And that's going to be an important part of my work. But in the middle of this, I'm very interested in the whole understanding of how do we derive meaning from things? What is the meaning of the spiritual path and the magic and the imaginal windows that we open? And to this end, I'd like to introduce you to the fourfold hermeneutic. I'll make an introduction to this in my part of the programme. Now, this is also known as the 4 levels or 4 senses of interpretation. And it's one of the treasures of the Western mysteries. And it's quite a concealed treasure because it's very little known, even amongst practicing esotericists. It's not well known. There are many interesting and historical reasons for this. Now, it belongs therefore firmly and was developed as part of earlier medieval Christianity as a mode of understanding the Christian mystery. And what's interesting for me about it is that actually one can see in this brilliant and beautiful penetrating way of thought a mode of understanding the whole spiritual path. All spiritual paths can in a sense be disclosed by the discussions of this hermeneutic. And therefore you can take this hermeneutic in a 2-fold aspect. One aspect for any person who's got a Christian orientation, it is a most marvellous penetration of the Christian mystery. But my concern here is honouring that background, taking that on as a basis to show that there is a 2-fold aspect and it becomes a dynamic mode of understanding all modes of the spiritual, all ways of opening this spiritual and magical window that we're trying to do. And so that's why really I'm interested in this programme, in showing the 4-fold hermeneutic for modern time, for we as moderns, in all our modes of practice. For the person with a Christian orientation, I hope it would be reintroducing them to their own tradition, strange as it might seem to say that. Just a little bit on the Christian background. This hermeneutic really develops as earliest Christianity tries to cope with the symbolic sense of the coming of Christ and what it means in relation to what we call the Old Testament, the ancient scriptures, why it is that there can be a symbolic and allegorical connection between the first covenant and the second great covenant brought by Jesus. And this led to this tremendous ferment of thinking and translation and thought about what Christianity and the figure of Christ himself meant in a longer prophetic tradition. And actually, amongst the early medieval authors, I'm thinking from St. Paul onwards, then to Origen, 3rd century AD, St. Augustine, major figures, 4th century AD, major figures in this, there is a tremendous subtlety of debate about the nature of the allegoric and the symbolic. And I'd like to put to you that the Christians particularly gave all of our mystery traditions this tremendous capacity, and I call it the receiving and true apprehension of allegories, signs, omens, and miracles. Receiving and true apprehension of when the symbolic and allegoric mode comes upon us, what then is contained within it and what does it demand of us to do and where does it go and where does it lead. So in that sense, it belongs to all spiritual paths. Now, each great system and form of entering the mysteries, such as alchemy, Kabbalah, all these other forms of the Hermetic modes of entering the mysteries, they are, of course, in their senses also hermeneutics. They're devices by which we might philosophize about the spiritual path. They all are. But there's something interesting about the Christian hermeneutic is that it is explicitly a hermeneutic. It therefore offers a mode of philosophic and discursive understanding of mystical experience, while being itself a guide to the Christian's mystical experience. So it fulfills that double function. And it is as a hermeneutic for us all that I'm going to present this material, the twofold aspect, therefore, I talk of here. So treating it as a dynamic hermeneutic mode, it is, when one begins to grasp what has been shown to us here, it is truly thrilling. This is a wonderful way of approach for the seeker on any path. And one of its great gifts is to show, I will lay out to you just an element of its power here. It divides the senses of understanding, originally of scripture, but I will say of all spiritual pursuits, into the four senses of the literal, historical, then the sense above that, the allegoric, where things begin to appear as showing other things, and then a great divide before one reaches yet a third sense in which both spiritual reality and scripture is to be understood, called the tropological, or the moral sense. And this is where the soul itself becomes infused with the nature of the work and understands that it is itself seeing itself. And that is the most extraordinary step in spiritual discipline in all paths. And the highest sense of all, the most mysterious, the one that one should least talk about and yet is the most powerful, the anagogic, where the soul becomes raised up to a point at which it can communicate with all things and with all beings and all intelligence. But that remains a mystery. And the true work of these paths is to get the seeker to move from the literal through allegory, symbol, omen, sign, literature, imagination, into self-knowledge of tropology, where these things become symbolic of the soul's own quest. And then the grace that comes from anagog descends upon it, and the work is fulfilled, whatever that might be. This is a beautiful structure, a very powerful hermeneutic, and it allows both discursive, intellectual and rational thought and living mystical experience to be brought together. It heals the division of the hemispheres. It allows us to reconnect with our tradition, and it allows also all manners of spiritual seeking, pagan and Christian and many others, and modern philosophical, to find a meeting point where they're not in conflict with each other. So that is the contribution I seek to make.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. So I hope you can see that we have a very inspiring team here, and all details of this course will be up on the website, so you can register and pay for it. And I'll also just mention that I will also be doing a 4-week webinar course on Renaissance music in association with the Finchley Trust in September, and that will also be up on the website. So we hope you'll enjoy this combination of art and heart and mystical hermeneutic, and we will see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.